Billionaires often will buy property in the middle of nowhere, even in the middle of the ocean, an entire island, like the founder of Facebook did. They will build robots that will defend their island. They will build deep underground stuff to protect them in the case of the world ending. I believe the founder of Amazon even built a clock in like a mountain or something in Texas, that's meant to be a clock for 10,000 years in the future so that people will know what time it is and some kind of odd thing like that. But there was a guy who builds bunkers for billionaires and helps them plan for the unthinkable. And he said that several very famous billionaires came together to meet with him and ask him a bunch of questions. During this interview questionnaire thing, they asked him, what do we do when all of this happens and money is no longer good for anything? How do we keep our security teams from turning on us? I just actually want to look at some similar texts in the Bible and just go over how, despite the fact that prepping is a good thing, and if you have billions of dollars, yeah, build your bunker, but it only goes so far. Let me just show you a few texts. Now, this is the app that I built with some AI tools. It's called Lex CLI. It's just a tool I came up with, and I just searched for the term in the English Standard Version Bible, the term "fall on us," and there's several verses in the Bible that actually use this kind of language. Now, I'm actually going to just use this to do like a cross reference here. Lex Luke 23:30. That's the first verse there. I believe I'm going to get more answers. Sorry, Lex Web. This is the cross reference version. Luke 23:30. All right. So here you have a bunch of references. You've got it in Revelation, you've got it in Hosea, you've got it in Isaiah. Let's open these. I'm going to type Lex read all, and what we've got here in let's start with the Old Testament. We'll move to the New Testament. Got Isaiah 2:19. And this is literally my favorite chapter in the Bible, Isaiah chapter 2. Starting in verse 17, the haughtiness of man, or the arrogance of man, shall be humbled, and the lofty pride of man shall be brought low, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. And the idols shall utterly pass away. Verse 19, and people shall enter the caves of the rocks and the holes of the ground from before the terror of the Lord, and from the splendor of his majesty when he arises to terrify the earth. In that day mankind will cast away their idols of silver and their idols of gold, which they made for themselves to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to enter the caverns of the rocks, the clefts of the cliffs, from before the terror of the Lord, from the splendor of his majesty when he arises to terrify the earth. Now, actually, I think, yeah, that's Isaiah. Now, we've also got one in Hosea 10:8. I'm just going to read the direct quote. The high places of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. Thorn and thistle shall grow up in their altars, and they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. You see both of these examples in Isaiah and Hosea, very similar, refer to arrogant people and specifically to idol worshipers. But Hosea seems to put it in a term that could be more general. It doesn't necessarily have to be an altar to an idol, although if you see in verse 7, he's talking about Samaria. They're not exactly known for their faithful worship of Yahweh, or the true God. Now let's see here. We've got also Revelation, Revelation 6:16, and we're going to start actually in verse 14. The sky vanished like a scroll that's being rolled up, every mountain and island. Interesting that it says this. Every mountain and island was removed from its place. These are the places that billionaires would build their bunkers, as it were. And it says, then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful, everyone slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? And, this is a part of the judgments of God on the earth. I believe we've got another Revelation passage. This is a similar verse, not exactly direct, but as the judgments of God unfold on the earth, it says, in those days people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. This is very similar to these cries of the people, where they actually want the mountains and rocks to fall on them. Look, they want to die rather than to live and face the conscious wrath of God Almighty, the Lamb of God. Now, there's other texts here. There's even a few in the Gospels where Jesus is saying in his apocalyptic section of Luke, they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills cover us. Let's read that actually. Let's see if I have it here. Yes. This is when Jesus is going to the cross, and he says, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren wombs that never bore, and the breasts, much different than a breast, the breasts that never nursed. For they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and the hills cover us. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? 2 others who are criminals were being led away to be put to death. Apologies, I misquoted. Luke 23 is actually a part of the Passion narrative. I think it's Luke 21. That is the apocalyptic section of the Gospel of Luke. Now, what can we say about all this? One thing is, if you notice the Revelation text here, it doesn't put this as Revelation 6:16, or actually 15. It says that the kings and great ones and generals, the rich and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks and the mountains. And so I just want to highlight the fact that even though you should prepare, you should have preparations, if only so that in such a season you don't have to depend on anyone else who did make preparations, right? You don't want to depend on the government, heaven forbid. In today's age, depending on the government for help is not the same thing as an Israelite in the old time depending on the government to protect the practice of gleaning, where your welfare was to go and actually pick the edge of the field, right? If you could not afford, if you didn't have food or what have you. This is actually something that the apostles do as they're walking along. They pick some of the grain and they rub it in their hands and they eat it right there. They just eat the raw grain, which was part of the gleaning process. Now, I guess what I'm saying here is no matter how much you have to prepare, whether it's as simple as going to the dollar store and buying a canned food, all the way up to buying an island and, building a bunker on that island and protecting it with robots. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that scope of things in itself. But if you're going to hedge your bets, if you're going to hem yourself in from danger, just remember the sort of thing that these people end up facing, the great day of their wrath. So from him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. So you see, the greatest thing to prepare for and protect yourself as far as preps go is to willingly offer yourself as a living sacrifice, as Paul says in Romans 12:1 and 2. The spiritual worship that the new covenant commands is not to give blood offerings of an animal or, God forbid, a human. The New Testament says that there is a once for all sacrifice, and that by trusting in the Christ and then offering up your life by obedience to the New Testament and the interpretation of the Old Testament through the New Testament, this is your preparation for eternity. And so you want to prepare in a way so that when you face the Lamb, because everyone must face him either for good or evil, and maybe there's a little bit of discipline for even those who did live for the Lamb, where it could be a little harsh and a little hard, as Paul talks about, giving church members that stray over to the devil for destruction so that they can be preserved on the last day. However that works, it's kind of a mystery in my mind. But regardless, you want to prepare your soul, you want to prepare your heart so that, yes, store up beans and all that stuff, have some rice, have an undeveloped plot of land that you and your family can run to outside of the city if you don't have a way to protect yourself in the midst of ordinary chaos. I mean, I live in the state of Florida. I like to have preparations for a freaking hurricane. I mean, I've lived through so many freaking hurricanes at this point. It's a no-brainer. It doesn't have to be the literal end of the world. But there is an end of the world, and even if you don't live to see the literal end of the world, there will be an end of your life, one way or the other, whether the Lamb returns and that's that, I guess that would be the end of the world, or whether you just die, an ordinary or sudden death, either way. You're going to have a culmination of everything your life is. And on that day, you don't just want to have gold and silver. If you're a billionaire, you don't just want to have land. You don't just want to have stuff. You don't just want to protect me and mine, although you are called to. You definitely should make those preparations. And in fact, in I think it's the book of James, James says you've stored up in the last days. But the thing is, he even says like your gold and your silver rot with you, or like cause corrosion on your garments. But James also commands the kindness to the poor. He says to give your cloak to a brother in need if he has need. What does this imply? He implies that it's good to have some kind of store to be able to be a benefactor of others, right? It's not good, if you can help it, to need to be the object of kindness. It is better to store up so that you don't need to depend on others. If you have to, that's that. But it's better if you can help it to not do that. So, like, I guess what I'm saying here is like there's a balance in all of this. It's not like don't prepare for ordinary things and don't make only spiritual things your preparation so that you're freaking like not able to pay your bills or whatever because you were so focused on reading the Bible that you couldn't go to freaking work or go to school and better your life. You want to balance all these things out. You don't want to be hyper focused on any one of these things. But once you strike that balance, it's golden, man. You'll have just an ordinary amount of clothes that you need, a place to stay, ordinary safety for you and yours as much as you can. And then you want that peace, first of all, just that peace of conscience between yourself and God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. You want both and, right? And if heaven forbid God commands you, or like by necessity because of persecution or whatever the reason is, or just circumstances in life where you have to leave your stuff, heaven forbid, like you want your relationship with God to be such that you're okay with it, even though it sucks. And you can leave stuff behind if you need to. Money is not everything for you. It's just a tool. But the thing you can't leave behind is your walk with God. The thing you can't, you can leave all your stuff when you die. But if you don't have a relationship with God, you're never going to have a relationship with God. stuff comes and goes. Think about Job. He had everything, he had nothing, and then he had everything again. You know, what really counted is that Job was a man who stood on his relationship with God. And when Job had nothing, even when Job is saying some really hard things about the Lord, what can you say? He's not an atheist. He believes that the Lord is just, and the reason he's incensed about the Lord's treatment of him is because he believes that the Lord is a righteous God. And so he takes his case to the Lord as the book progresses. And he begins to raise it with the Lord. And even though he acknowledges he misspoke in his attitude and the ways he was saying these things, he even puts his hand over his mouth as a symbol. The thing that made Job able to go from everything to nothing to everything, regardless of what the order is for you in your life, if that happens to you, God forbid, but you always just, as I think Third John says, may it prosper with you, may it be well with you, etc. But if you face that sort of thing, the great thing about your relationship with God is, gosh darn, dude, you can go from everything to nothing to everything, and it's just like another day. All right. Hopefully that was a helpful study. By the way, this is my app, Lex CLI. I am developing a web version of this, so you don't need to be as tech savvy as you currently need to be to use this. But it's still kind of in development, so I don't want to launch it just yet, but we're getting close. But the nice thing about this thing is, I mean, if you were in a persecuted place and you had a laptop, like, you don't need the internet to do this stuff. There's no internet here. Once you download it, you can go off grid with it. Like, if you have like a solar panel and a laptop, man, it's just like super nice. And there's a lot of features in there. Go look at my video on this app if you want to look at some of the features of it. Anyway, thanks so much for your time. Hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Bye.